Hi everyone, it's Dan here with another over-the-board game I played. This one was played in April of 2014, and this game I'm white and my opponent is black. I started off pawn e4, and we get into the Philidor defense. Now the Philidor is a defense I don't know too much about, or at least I didn't at the time of playing this game. For example, I played here bishop c4 because I didn't know that by far the most commonly played move here is pawn to d4. The threat here is after, let's say, bishop to g4, white can capture the pawn, and if black immediately recaptures, then he'll go down a pawn and be uncastled for the rest of the game. So after the white pawn captures on e5, black should take the knight, and after the queen recaptures, now can recapture the pawn, but white now certainly has a lead in development. He's got his queen out on f3. Black doesn't have any pieces out currently. And if we back up, if after the pawn pushes to d4, we have takes immediately, well, now the knight looks pretty good in the center. Challenging it with the knight can lead to a damaged pawn structure, like so, and challenging it with the pawn instead here just means that d5 is now whole, and if you could picture a knight on that square, it would be awesome. Now, I'm not saying that these types of challenges from the knight or pawn are necessarily best or book, but that's just a brief look at what might happen. In any event, we didn't go down that road. In the game, what I played here again was bishop to c4. Black develops and challenges, and the light square bishops are exchanged, while black now has doubled pawns on the e-file. Is that so terrible? I don't know. The double pawns are in the center as opposed to the knight or bishop files, but now black has the f-file to play with. So it is a structural defect, but one I think black can work with. Now I play pawn to d4, black develops, and we have some exchanges on the e5 square followed by the exchange of queens, except here that just helps black out since now the rook has the d-file. In fact, if we go back, instead of exchanging queens here, a much better move would have been the tactical shot of queen to h5 check with a fork. But I did miss that in the game, and again we wound up here with the rook bearing down on the d-file. I castle, black develops with pressure on the pawn. I develop to defend, but bishop b4 threatens to win a pawn. I deal with this threat by placing the knight in a pin. Black immediately puts a question to the bishop, and I take, damaging the kingside pawn structure even further. And here I'm worried about winding up with doubled pawns myself, so I move my knight. But this actually swings the game in black's favor, because black follows up with rook to d2, and this rook is very active. And in fact, it looks like no matter what I do, I'm going to lose a pawn. What I first do is make a counter-attacking move with c3, kicking the bishop back. Then I save my knight by moving it to g3. And here, to my surprise, my opponent does not take the b-pawn, which at the time I assumed he would, and the computer actually gives as the best move. Instead, he launches the h-pawn down. First to h5, I now guard my b-pawn, and the h-pawn kicks my knight to the corner, and look at that, that piece just looks extremely pathetic. In fact, the computer scores this as nearly a 1.5 advantage to black, and it's not difficult to see why. You have a very active rook versus a dummy knight in the corner. But does my opponent capitalize on this? We will see. First comes f5, but I don't take, since that would straighten out his pawn structure. Instead, I start trying to deal with this rook on my second rank. We dance here a little bit, and for a moment it looks like we might end up drawing, but here my opponent obviously wanted something more than that, and decided at this point to take the pawn. And while now black is up a pawn, it's a very unhealthy pawn. In fact, with these tripled pawns, I'm going to be getting that material back soon. And even though my knight is in the corner, the pawn structure for black actually means that this position, according to the computer, is dead equal. From here, I go right after the e-pawn. Black pushes h3, trying to induce a weakness. I ignore that and take, and he plays h captures g, which now, after about 10 moves of black having the advantage, lets white have some new life in the position. I don't take the pawn right away, and instead I bring my knight back out of the corner. Black castles, which actually at this point is probably unnecessary. He can probably just leave his king in the center safely, play something like f7, and leave his rook where it is, since it's kind of active on the h-file already. But he does castle. After that, I take the pawn, and at this point, the rooks come off. My knight gets to the center, black starts to activate his king, and here I play f3 with the simple idea of stopping black's f-pawn and protecting my knight. But actually, this turns out to be an inaccuracy. Instead, king to f3 would have been better, because from f3 he can get to g4, and I would have been assured excellent king activity. Now, I do get to that position in the game, but only because my opponent does stop me from getting there, even though he could have. f3 instead here means that my king is going to have to hike over to the h-file to get active, which is a detour away from the center, and so not one he likes having to take. In any event, f3 isn't losing, it just throws away a positional advantage I had. After f3 we have king to g5, my king slides over to the h-file, and instead of king f5, getting the king even more active and keeping my king out of g4, black here plays bishop to e7. After the game, my opponent said he wanted to limit my king from moving up the h-file, but the problem is my king can still get to g4, and now the computer scores this as decisively in white's favor. I have an attack on the pawn, so e5 to defend, but now comes h4. And after b6, I here start to play on the queen side. b4 is met with b5, knight d2 prepares c4. Black does well not to take though, since that would let my knight in on the queen side, so instead we have a6 and the pawns are exchanged. I play knight e4, the bishop backs up, and actually for the rest of the game, nothing terribly exciting happens. We just kind of dance back and forth. My knight creates little one-move threats which black easily parries, and it is actually at this point in the game right here that both of our clocks were under 2 minutes, and I make the worst move of the entire game. I actually offer a draw. Black accepts, and the game ends peacefully. Except, of course, for this entire endgame, I've had an advantage, and as you can imagine, it was extremely frustrating for me later when I realized I had that advantage, and that I was not able to realize it to convert the win. So, what could have been done? Let's go back to this position here, where after the pawn is pushed to b6, the winning idea here for white is going to be to use the h-pawn as a decoy to lure the black king away from its defense of f5, allowing white to penetrate further into the position. And from here, it's just a clear win. The technique should be that if the king takes the pawn, then e5 fails, and so too will f4. And if instead we have bishop to d6 here to protect e5, then knight f6 defends h5. On the next turn, we're just going to have knight to g4 check. Black can take the h-pawn, but then the e5 pawn falls. Black can try to defend f4, but then the king is actually just offside and unable to really do very much. After b4 from white, black is actually kind of in zugzwang. If he moves the king, then he loses the f-pawn. And if he leaves the king where he is, eventually he's going to run out of pawn moves, and he's going to have to move the king. Once the king retreats to g6, at this point, who even cares about the f-pawn? Just go for the queenside pawns. White will get c6, the c-pawn will march and queen, and that'll pretty much be the game. So this was an interesting game, and went back and forth. It was not looking good there for a while for me, but thanks to some inaccuracies from my opponent, I was able to weasel my way out of a tough spot. And of course, as I said, it was extremely frustrating to learn later that I had the win, but my lack of endgame knowledge and technique only got me a draw. Still, this game, as are all games, was a learning experience, and now I know a little something about good knight versus bad bishop endgames. Anyway, I hope this video was helpful in some way. Questions, comments, and ratings are always welcome, and thanks for watching.